Hey, what's up gamers? Vaporadark here. I'm bringing you a solo queue tier list for AD carry. This is only going to be actually showing you, well, it's a tier list for AD carries only, so not balling picks in general. If it were balling picks in general, well, this list would look a lot more like this, with mages all at the top and ADCs down at the bottom, which we're all ADC players here. We don't give a fuck what mages are strong, we just want to play ADCs, so I'm just going to exclude them all. As so, just Ziggs does not exist here, alright? Just pretend he's not there, alright? We're just looking at the AD carries, alright? Okay, so S tier, I have Draven and Aphelios at the top, so Draven is very strong right now. He got buffed in 11.13, I believe. He was also already actually quite strong with the Essence Reaver into Prowler's Claw build that had just started to pop up. He's actually very strong with Essence Reaver in general. As you can see, most of his win rates with his item are very high, whether he builds it first or even if he's just building it second. But it is better to build it first. Usually into lethality. It also works quite well though to build Essence Reaver into Gale Force, as you can see. The important thing is that you don't build Kraken Slayer. If you're going to build Kraken Slayer, just build it first. The thing about Essence Reaver is that it's actually quite good to build as a first item if you want to build a mythic that is not good as a first item. So Gale Force is quite a good mythic, but not good as a first item. Prowler's Claw, it's built for the mythic passive, which gives you lethality per item. So that doesn't apply at first item, making it quite a weak first item. So that's why you build Essence Reaver first here. And that's why the win rate for Kraken Slayer second is not actually very good. Even though if you build it first, then it's actually a bit better. That's because you want to build Essence Reaver first. And then follow it up with a mythic that is not good by itself as a first item. You can use Conqueror, you can use Hail of Blades. I'm not sure why Hail of Blades is such a bad win rate, honestly. It does feel fine when I use it, but Conqueror and PTA are both fine as well. Dark Harvest also seems to be alright. I'm not too sure about that though, I haven't tested it myself. Next up is Aphelios, who is quite new onto the list. He has become, just very suddenly has come onto the radar ever since his buffs in 11.13 as well, I believe. Where they buffed his AD and lethality on his Q and D, and that was also following up a patch where he also received some other changes, which are also a very small buff. So he is actually quite strong ever since that last buff, because it has actually opened up an entirely new playstyle for him. For the actual buffs themselves weren't actually that good if you just keep playing Aphelios the way you were playing him before. You see the Kraken Slayer into Runans or Phantom Dancer build. This is still not great. Aphelios is just not in a good spot with this build. However, it did open up a entirely new playstyle, which is Q max into E max. This was not on the radar before. Now it's actually quite good though. You can see it just shines above everything else. Every other skill order you could use on Aphelios. Use this skilling order, Q into E into W, and you combine it with Kraken Slayer into Collector. And you suddenly have an entirely new playstyle of Aphelios, which obviously plays the same. You know, you don't have to learn anything new, but basically it's just Aphelios, if he's much burstier with his auto attacks, he can basically, like, if you're using PTA, which actually I believe, yep, is the highest win rate rune here, purely because it works so well with this build. If you're using PTA, you can pretty much just 3-shot squishies at any point after you get Kraken Slayer and Collector. Maybe if you add, maybe you need to add Infinity Edge there as well, but eventually you do become extremely bursty. You just do so much damage, it's absolutely obscene. And this has only become possible in like 11.13, and basically it's just made Aphelios suddenly huge. He's got there. He's up there with Draven. This is why I have these two up here at the top. I don't think any other ADC compares to these two right now. Moving on to A tier, we've got Misfortune. Misfortune, I think, is actually extremely strong now if you build Kraken Slayer into Bloodthirster. She has a ton of build variety, actually. Look at all these mythics. All of these mythics actually have a place in Misfortune. Like, they are an option on her. However, I think the absolutely optimal build is just always going to be Kraken Slayer into Bloodthirster. As you can see, it actually just completely outshines everything else. And this is because it's for the same reason that Miss Fortune uses Overheal, for example. Miss Fortune works really well with shields because of her W passive. So her W passive, if you don't know, it gives her a ton of movement speed, but it gets broken when she takes damage. Taking damage, though, doesn't count if you have a shield. So if you have Overheal, you can be chasing an enemy down like through minion aggro, and the movement speed just won't break unless your Overshield breaks. So this works really well with Overheal, and then if you add Bloodthirster to the mix as well, you just get this massive shield, and it is very hard to break your movement speed. Basically, it's not a mobility item, but it makes Miss Fortune a lot more mobile, and it just synergizes extremely well with her. It also doesn't hurt as well that Miss Fortune actually has really good synergy with lifesteal in general, even if you don't have Overshields, because of her passive. Her passive adds more damage to her autos if she's attacking a new target each time. Basically, in the average game, she's gonna deal a lot more damage to through autos onto minions than other champions because of this passive, and that makes her have really good synergy with lifesteal. So when you add lifesteal and the Overshield into the mix, it just makes Bloodthirster just far and away the best item choice on her. And so when you're building particularly this, then I think that makes Miss Fortune pretty much at the top of A tier, probably. So then we've got Ezreal. So Ezreal, as you probably are well aware, was absolutely at the very top of the ADC tier list a few patches ago when the Divine Sunder got buffed. He has fallen off a bit since he got that item nerfed. However, he's still actually well, not extremely strong, but you know, pretty much up there at the top of A tier. He's definitely still got this as a viable item. In fact, it's his optimal item still. It's still the best build you can use. It's just not quite as strong as he used to be before, but still an extremely strong choice, making him solidly an A tier. Next up, we got Vayne. Actually, one thing I forgot to mention, a lot of this tier list is influenced by the fact that Wit's End is extremely strong right now. Wit's End is actually the strongest ADC item. The only issue is there's only so many ADCs that actually have it as a viable item. However, if you're playing an ADC that like uses it well, that ADC is probably going to be quite strong right now, or at the very least it's going to be way stronger than it actually should be in the current meta. Purely because this item is extremely fucking overtuned. So Vayne, it's for that reason that I have her in A tier, I think. You can see here. There's some pretty well, she would be an A tier anyway, I guess, but she's a little bit further up in A tier than she otherwise would be, just because she uses Wit's End so well. As you can see here, it's pretty much at the top of the win rates. She actually has it viable as a first item as well. Can do Wit's End into Runans, can do Wit's End into, well, Stridebreaker was an option when I actually give mobility. Can also do Gale Force. Don't take these win rates as they are because the sample size is way too low. But I have tried these builds myself, I know they're quite good. Not Stridebreaker anymore though, obviously. Also, one build that I've been loving recently is Wit's End into Ginsu's. I actually think that might be the best build on Vayne. It's not really something I can verify through win rates though, because almost nobody else uses it. But it does do some insane damage, because Ginsu's synergizes so well with Ginsu's. Ginsu's synergizes so well with Wit's End. After Ginsu, you can either do Phantom Dancer, you can do Runans, you can do Gale Force. There are actually quite a lot of options there. I don't even know which is best. I've experimented quite a lot. They all seem really good. You do more damage if you just keep going for cheap items instead of finishing your mythic, because your mythic is basically only going to be there for mobility. However, that is extremely strong. Like, Gale Force is a very strong mythic later on into the game. And if you want the mobility, you can feel free to build that, whether it's second item or third item, just so long as you're not building it first, because as I explained before with Draven, it's just not that good as a first item. Even aside from Wit's End, obviously Vayne actually does have some pretty decent win rates here with quite a variety of builds. Kraken Slayer into Phantom Dancer, Kraken Slayer into Ginsu's. I don't know why Infinity Edge always shows up so high on this. I think that's people trolling when they already have a lead. can use either PTA or Hail Blades. You also have Fleet Footwork as a option for if you want to play a bit more defensively in lane. I don't use it. I can't remember the last time I used it, but it's pretty much always high up in the win rates, so I guess it's got to be decent. And also worth mentioning, she works really well with Lulu compared to most other supports. If you have a Lulu, that is a very good time to pick Vayne, generally. And especially if the enemy team has tanks, no ADC is going to shred tanks the way Vayne does, not even Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw is more of a general damage dealer, whose main advantage comes from his range, whereas Vayne is just absolutely impossible to survive for anybody, no matter how tanky you are. Next up, we've got Kog'Maw himself. So one thing I want to say is it's actually a common misconception that Kog'Maw is pretty much only playable with Lulu. She is probably his best support. However, he is actually, well, also just for the record, he is pretty high up in win rates, but that is partially because he's literally played in 30% of his games with a Lulu. However, as you can see, once you get past these other supports, which I have no idea why they have such a high play rate with Kog'Maw, they're pretty terrible with him. Once you get past these, he actually has some quite decent win rates with quite a variety of other supports. Morgana, Leona, Soraka, Nami, Blitzcrank, Xerath, Janna. In general, he tends to have quite good win rates with mages, which is because they can help him win lane. And so, if he's winning lane and he's also outscaling pretty much every other ADC, that is a good spot for Kog'Maw to be in. He's actually very underrated with those champions. So this is definitely a champion that I think is very much being slept on right now, partially because he's such a good Wits End abuser. In fact, the first Wits End abuser that people have actually caught on to, where people are actually building a first item instead of a mythic. But even aside from that, I think he's just in quite a decent spot. So for Kog'Maw, you have the option. I'd pretty much do the same build on Kog'Maw that I do on Vayne. Actually, I think it started off as a Kog'Maw build for me, then I tried it on Vayne and it worked really well on her too. So you can either do Wits End into Runaan's or Wits End into Ginsu's, or you can even just do Wits End into Gale Force if you need the survivability. One thing that annoys me about this build is that it became popularized as tank Kog'Maw. There is no reason whatsoever why you should build tank Kog'Maw. It's terrible. The only reason it works is because the build begins with two of the strongest items that it could build. After that, as third item, why would you... Look, every DPS item has a higher win rate than Randuin's Omen. In fact, I actually did think it was quite decent with Frostfire Gauntlet before Frostfire Gauntlet got nerfed for ranged champions. And it stood out in win rates that it was actually quite a decent choice. However, I don't know why nobody was using Frostfire Gauntlet. Instead, they used Randuin's Omen, which didn't make sense. It's like the worst choice here. You know? So this is known as the tank Kog'Maw build, Wits End into Runaan's. You don't need to build tank. You should not build tank. It's not a good build. Wits End into Runaan's is just a really strong build, and please don't build tank after that, please. You should build Ginsu's, it's quite strong. Or you can build a second and then Runaan's, or you can do, basically the item pool after Wits End is Gale Force, Runaan's, Ginsu's. It doesn't really matter too much which order you build in. It can be a little bit situational. Do you want wave clear? Do you want damage onto tanks? Do you want just DPS in general? Do you want some survivability, mobility, whatever? You have so many choices there, consisting of those 3 item choices. Don't build tank. Alright, that's all I'm saying. Also, lethal tempo is absolutely core if you are playing with Lulu. However, if you are not playing with a Lulu, you can actually consider Hail of Blades to have a stronger laning phase. It will scale quite a bit worse actually, because you are going to be building a lot of attack speed. You will end up hitting the cap, and you can break the attack speed cap for longer if you have lethal tempo than if you have Hail of Blades. However, Kog'Maw's laning phase with Hail of Blades is actually ridiculously underrated. It is a lot stronger than you would expect. So if you're laning with something like a Leona, a Nautilus, a Blitzcrank, any kind of mage support, just anything that wants to play aggressively in lane, you are going to find yourself in a you're going to find that you have a much stronger laning phase and much more follow-up to those champions kits if you're using Hail of Blades compared to lethal tempo. Next up is Ashe. Ashe is actually, I think I was going to put her in B tier, except I noticed she is also actually a terrific Wits End abuser. So Ashe can actually do Wits. It's very strong on Ashe to build Kraken Slayer first and then Wits End. You do also, however, have the option of Wits End first. When the whole Stridebreaker Ashe was a thing, people were doing Bork into Stridebreaker. It was also an option to do Wits End into Stridebreaker, not an option anymore. However, you still basically the concept of the build was you want to build a DPS non-mythic item, then follow it up with Stridebreaker, the mobility item, which isn't good as a first item because it does no damage, but once you have your damage item, then you can build it, you know? So, it's the same concept with Gale Force. Sucks as a first item, but you can build it after you have your first damage item, which in this case would be Wits End. Also works with Bork, but I think Wits End, as I said, is just super busted right now. This is the best build. I don't know if you'd want to use Ginsu's, I haven't tried that. Seems to have a decent enough win rate though, but main thing is, if you want to rush Wits End, you can either do Wits End into Runeans, then after Runeans, you would do Gale Force. Doesn't show up here, unfortunately, but I can assure you that's a very strong build. Also, yep, sure, it works with Immortal Shield Bow if you need the survivability. And alternatively, you can just do Gale Force second and then build Runeans or Phantom Dancer or whatever you want. Mind you, that, yeah, I forgot to mention that is another option. Wits End into Phantom Dancer. Phantom Dancer is also another item that's like very overtuned. It deserves a nerf, but it's just nowhere near on the scale as Wits End. Like Wits End should not ever be a viable first item or even second item for the vast majority of ADCs. The fact that it even shows up on the radar for a champion like Ashe is just because of how extremely fucking busted it is, and it's just getting very hard slept on right now. And it's pretty much making Ashe A tier on its own. Then we've got Jinx over in B tier. We're moving on to B tier now, also known as tier 3. So Jinx, as we all know, was very strong a few patches ago, but fell off a bit after she got quite a nerf. She's actually still quite decent with Kraken Slayer into Phantom Dancer, and actually there is another build that I noticed is actually quite strong, which is Stormers a second. It doesn't matter if you're using Gale Force, which is also an option, instead of Kraken Slayer. Except if you're using Gale Force, you basically don't want to use Phantom Dancer, because the whole point of Phantom Dancer is it gives you so much attack speed, which synergizes so well with Kraken Slayer. If you're not using Kraken Slayer, it's not as big a deal. Just go for Runeans. However, whether you're using Kraken Slayer or whether you're using Gale Force, Storm Wizard just consistently shows up as a really high win rate item, which is something that's just being very much slept on her, because this win rate is actually extremely high. It is pretty much what I would usually put in S tier. Except just because this one item is having such a good win rate on her, and I haven't even tested it, I don't feel confident enough to like say it puts her in A tier or S tier. I'm just gonna say this is probably being very much underrated. It makes Jinx quite strong. And it works especially well with Lethal Tempo, because obviously Lethal Tempo gives you so much attack speed, and attack speed obviously synergizes really well with AD. So with Stormwizard, you're going to be packing quite a punch because it gives quite a lot of AD compared to, obviously, 0 AD on Runeans, 20 AD on Phantom Dancer. And it just has very good synergy with, well, Stormwizard with Lethal Tempo. They have good synergy with each other. And therefore, oh, also, yeah, I did notice as well, actually has a better win rate and a better pick rate. So this is a build that's already been discovered. You know, I'm not the one coming up with this. This is just something other people are using, and I'm only just finding out about it through win rates and pick rates that people are actually doing this. If you're using this build, you actually want to do Fire Cannon third, because it just gives you so much insane poke at 3 items. And obviously you get a lot of DPS if you do Infinity Edge third. You do a ton of DPS, in fact, because you'll be using Lethal Tempo with it as well. But the poke from Fire Cannon is actually just going to be too huge when you combine these two Energizer passives. And this win rate is definitely what I would usually put in S tier. But as I said, like, I've not tested this build. I literally only just found out about it. I don't really want to just knee-jerk reaction put Jinx all the way up here. because of that. But, you know, just bear that in mind. I think Jinx is actually probably really underrated right now with this Stormrazor second build. Next up, we've got Twitch. Twitch is an ADC that I've lately been using the Guild Force second build on. I've actually been using Bork is the thing. As you can see, Bork into Guild Force, 57% win rate. It's a very common pattern on ADCs that have a viable. If you're playing an ADC who has a first item viable option that isn't the mythic, it is pretty much always going to be consistent that they have Guild Force viable as a second option, as a second item as their mythic, even if it as a first item it's not actually, it doesn't stand out that much. So I've been using Bork, but as you can see, Wit's End, because it's so busted, very much stands out as his highest win rate, the first item. You can do Wit's End into Runeance into Guild Force. You can do Wit's End into Guild Force into Runeance. That's also fine. There is also this weird build. Most people using Wit's End into Runeance on Twitch actually doing this weird tank build, Titanic Hydra 3rd. I haven't tried it yet myself. I have played against it actually. It's quite decent. This is actually a really good win rate. Not the greatest sample size, but like it's enough to see that this build is at the very least quite viable. I'm not sure if it would be better than Guild Force, which I think this build is actually just insane, and I know that for a fact. This build I'm not so confident on, but I mean it might be worth trying out. I should definitely try it at some point. Again, this is like, because this build is like so untested, I'm basically the only person using these sorts of builds with the delayed Guild Force. I'm not confident enough to put Twitch in A tier. Maybe I would even put him in S tier if like I was 100% confident that I was right about the strength of this build. But, you know, I'm not, so I'm just putting him in B tier for now. But, you know, bear that in mind that I think he's also another champion that is actually very much underrated if you're using one of these really strong builds. Okay, so moving on, we've got Jhin, also in B tier. So Jhin, pretty much, I think the only thing you ever want to do is Guild Force. It's pretty straightforward. There's nothing, I don't think there is much that is people are sleeping on with Jhin. The most popular build is Guild Force into Collector, and that is pretty much probably the best choice. There's nothing else that stands out as potentially being a better option. The stuff that stand out as potentially being equally strong. You can use Dark Harvest if you want to snowball, or if you're confident in your matchup, or if you have a aggressive laning support, or even if you have something like a Janna, so long as you're still confident that you're going to win lane. Dark Harvest is still decent. You do also have Fleet Footwork being the more popular option at high reloads actually, but generally I think Dark Harvest is better for solo queue, and you should only go to Fleet Footwork if you really are not confident in your matchup. Next up, we've got Tristana. Another ADC that was like very much at the top of the tier list at the start of the season, but also got nerfed, similar to Jinx. You've got the option of Kraken Slayer into Phantom Dancer, or Kraken Slayer into Stormrazor. Stormrazor should usually be the best option on her. Has a slightly higher win rate as you can see, but it's also 100 gold more expensive, which kind of inflates it. I think they're about the same in strength. I would use Stormrazor into squishy comps, Phantom Dancer into squishier comp, into tankier comp, sorry, to get more Kraken Slayer procs, make that do more work. You also have potentially Guild Force as a choice. I don't think it's as good though, but it's popular for a reason, so people swear by it. If you are going to use Guild Force, don't use Phantom Dancer, because the whole point of Phantom Dancer is you get more Kraken Slayer procs. If that's not a factor, you just always use Stormrazor second. Some people use also Collector first, Collector second, sorry, as you can see. But bearing in mind that it's 300 gold more expensive than Stormrazor, I don't think it's ever. I don't think it can compete with it. I think Stormrazor second is always going to be better than Collector. Yeah, even after the Halo Blades nerf, you definitely still want to use Halo Blades. It's way better than the competition. There is no competition. You always use Halo Blades on Tristana. Seen a lot of chatter in the Tristana mains community about lethal tempo, about rest attack. Please don't. It's terrible. Stick to Halo plays. Just because something gets nerfed does not make it bad. It is still definitively the best choice on Tristana. Next up, we've got Sivir. So Sivir is very strong right now with lethality builds. I think the best lethality build is Mana Moon into Prowler's Claw. If you're not using Prowler's Claw, I don't think she's actually quite A tier. I would put her in B tier, but I think she is quite decent with Prowler's Claw. As I said, you don't want to build Prowler's Claw first though. The whole point of it is the mythic passive. So you want at least one other item before that, and Mana Moon works quite well for that purpose. And she's quite strong with this build. You do also have the option of crit. Thing is, crit works better into tankier comps, but if you're into tankier comp, you really had no reason to pick Sivir. So basically, when you would want to use crit is either if you're just... honestly, whenever I play Sivir, I play crit. I just prefer crit. It's just my favorite playstyle. So if you also just really like crit, okay, then go ahead, use crit. But alternatively, you pick Sivir, expecting her to be a good pick for the situation, and then just end up picking all these tanks. Okay, then you're gonna have to make the best out of it, which means building Kraken Slayer into Essence Reaver. Or even just Essence Reaver into Gale Force. Not gonna be quite as good into tanks as Kraken Slayer, but it is still like better into tanks than lethality would be. So that is an option, but it's just, it is significantly weaker than lethality though, in my opinion. Lethality, she probably really belongs in A tier if you're using the Prowler's build. Oh, I did forget to mention, but obviously use Dark Harvest on lethality and lethal tempo on crit. Next up in B tier, we've got Samira. That's not how you spell that. Okay, so Samira was previously a little bit busted when she got those changes. So she... what happened with Samira was she got really gutted on one patch, and everybody just wrote her off as terrible. Immediately after, she got some follow-up changes that were actually really good buffs, and people still thought she was terrible, even though the changes were like super good, and she actually became quite overtuned. However, I think she got nerfed again or something. Or at the very least, the meta shifted somewhat, and she's not quite busted anymore. Still pretty solid though. Honestly, I'm reconsidering whether she really belongs all the way down here in B tier. She's probably quite near the top. Maybe even deserves to be an A tier. I don't really want to overthink this, but yeah. So your choices on Samira are pretty much the most popular build on her is also similar to Jhin. It's like probably the best choice. There's nothing else that stands out as potentially better. Just Shield Bow into Collector, either into Bloodthirster or into Infinity Edge. Either one is actually fine. You can see the win rate between doing Bloodthirster third and Infinity Edge third is not really that different, so long as you build the other one afterwards, you know. I think there was, yeah, potentially. You can see here Gale Force is such a good win rate. Gale Force, I think, is actually being... This is one thing that I would say is being quite slept on with Samira. She seems to have quite a good win rate with that. And she also has quite a decent win rate with Collector and Shield Bow. I don't know if that's just a fluke because of the low sample size, but might be something worth looking into. And if it's good with Shield Bow second, then that would mean that Collector into Gale Force is actually really strong as well, because as we've explained, the Gale Force tends to work best when you can build it second or third or fourth, and you build some other random non-mythic damage item before it. If Collector first is a good option for Samira, which I'm not saying it is, I don't know, I've not tried it, then that would make Gale Force second really strong on her. Just something to consider. Next up, we've got Kalista. Kalista, I was originally going to put either in C tier or D tier. However, she did get saved by Wit's End. Unfortunately, well, Kalista is pretty terrible, honestly. Like, she deserves to be terrible. Her synergy with Wit's End only just puts her, like, at the very back of B tier. However, you can see builds involving Wit's End tend to shine above the rest, and that keeps her from being terrible. She's quite mediocre if you're using Wit's End. Shield Bow into Wit's End is probably going to be the best option. You also have the option of rushing Wit's End into Runans. If you're doing this build, again, this opens up Gale Force as a viable third item. Doesn't show up here because barely anybody's using it, but if you want to take my word for it, I think Gale Force is probably quite a decent third item option on her if you're doing this style of build. Well, Hail Blades is by far the most popular choice on her. However, you do also have the choice of Lethal Tempo if you want more scaling, which can, like, depend on the matchup. Usually you would not really want to pick Kalista if you're not going to be dominating lane, but if shit happens and you just end up in a losing matchup, you might want to consider Lethal Tempo. Okay, so next up we've got Xayah. And we're moving on to C tier. We've got Xayah in C tier. So Xayah pretty much has been super strong all season, but has been getting a few nerfs here and there. And the past couple of nerfs especially were just kind of the final nail in the coffin, where she went from being pretty much one of the top ADCs for climbing to just here in C tier. So obviously the most popular build on her is to rush Serrated Dirk and go into the Kraken Slayer components or Gale Force components and get your Q evolve very quickly off of that. That makes her very strong in lane. But then you're stuck either building Collector second, which is not that great, or you're building Phantom Dancer second, which is great, but you're sitting on the Collector components, which is massively delaying your your Phantom Dancer Power Spike. And then leaves you in this really awkward spot where you kind of have to build Collector third instead of Infinity Edge, which is just not a great choice. She did also get affected by the Halo Blades nerf. It wasn't a massive nerf, it only dropped her win rate, I think, by like 0.5% at the time. Biggest nerf was the nerf to her Q. That was what basically brought her down. So you still obviously want to use Halo Blades, just like Tristana. Even though it got nerfed, it's still far and away the best choice on her. One thing I do want to say is, I think because Phantom Dancer is just so strong right now, I think actually you probably don't even want to do the Q Rush Evolve. When I've been playing Xayah lately, I've been rushing Berserkers into Kraken Slayer, into Phantom Dancer. The advantage of this build is that it scales much better because you don't have that awkward Serrated Dirk in your build that's delaying the rest of your build. You get a really fast... You obviously delay your Q evolve because you can't actually get your Q evolve until you finish Kraken Slayer and add another 2 long swords on top of that, which will both build into Phantom Dancer. But you do get a much quicker E evolve because you get E evolve as soon as you finish Phantom Dancer. You get Q and E evolve just off of your first 2 items, which is really good. And those 2 items are going to be relatively cheap. It's a relatively cheap build. And then when you build Infinity Edge third, with this build, this win rate is actually pretty competitive with most of A tier. Definitely better than B tier. However, you know, I don't want to... even though this build has been working so well for me and it feels really strong to me, and it does seem to have quite a good win rate, assuming that none of these people are actually doing Serrated Dirk, assuming that they're just doing my style of build of just delaying the Q evolve until after Kraken Slayer. Well, this does have a really good win rate, but I don't want to put Xayah like skipping all the way from C tier all the way to A tier just because this one build is maybe quite good. I don't know for sure that it's good. I'm relatively confident, but I don't want to, you know, take my own word as law here. So just another thing to bear in mind. I think she is still quite decent if you're using this build. No Serrated Dirk, just regular ADC build, Phantom Dancer, Kraken Slayer, Infinity Edge. But there's no guarantee of that. Moving on, we've got Caitlyn. Caitlyn, unfortunately, there's no salvaging her. There's no build that I look at and think, oh yeah, you know what, maybe if I'm right about how strong this build is, maybe she actually belongs in B tier, maybe A tier. No, Caitlyn is just bad. There's no saving her. Her best build is probably just going to be Gale Force into Storm Wizard, or if you're using Kraken Slayer because you need anti-tank items, then you actually want to use Phantom Dancer, which has a little bit of a better win rate, but this is a highly niche build. You only want to use it against tanks, and even then, it's still like at best the same win rate as B tier, or at best the same win rate as like other C tier champions. So not a good time to be a Caitlyn player, unfortunately. Halo Blades, I've been noticing, has a better win rate than I would expect to have on her, a better win rate than every other rune. Might, if I'm right, or if win rates are right, that this is actually the best choice on her, that would bring her viability up a bit. I haven't tried it myself yet. However, it still wouldn't push her up anything further than like low B tier, I think. The win rate is not actually that much better than her other choices. Okay, next up, we've got Xayah. Okay, Xayah's one where I'm basically only putting her in C. Oh, no, okay, actually, Xayah usually, if I were to just take her win rate at face value, she would belong in D tier. I put her in C tier though, because I think she's actually being a little bit underrated. In fact, so much underrated that I think she belongs all the way up here in B tier at the very least. And that's for a few reasons. I think quite a few things are being slept on her. But because, obviously, I don't want to take my own word as law here. I don't want to boost her too far up in the rankings just because I think maybe one build or one rune is actually quite a bit strong on her. So for Xayah, actually, I think, first off, I've been watching Halo Blades on Xayah, like ever since Halo Blades became a thing in ADCs. Ever since that patch where Halo Blades got buffed for ADCs, or well, just got buffed in general, and it became viable in ADCs, such as Tristana and Xayah, you know, ADCs who weren't using Halo Blades before. Xayah saw the same rise in win rate that those ADCs did, and saw the same like sort of win rate relative to the other choices that those ADCs did. You know, you can see Halo Blades here is a whole 2% higher than Lethal Tempo, higher than BTA, higher than this, higher than this. It's 2% higher than anything else. And this is not just a one patch thing. I've constantly been monitoring this. It has always been 2% higher. And yet, unlike Xayah, unlike Xayah and Tristana, where people started noticing this and just the pick rate started increasing and increasing and increasing until it became like 80% used, there's only a few people that use this on Xayah. I don't know why. It is so logical. I mean, you press W, you set up 3 feathers really fast, you go for the snare. You know, it just sets up your combo so very nicely. And she's not a champion who would break the attack speed cap very easily, or who necessarily scales too well with attack speed. It doesn't make really any sense why people are so slow to pick up on this, but I think Halo Blades, like I don't want to be, I don't want to claim like my opinion is king, obviously, or I don't want to say that just because this thing has a high win rate on one patch with a low sample size, that means it's the best. However, I've been watching this for so long, and I've been playing Halo Blade Xayah for so long. When I play Xayah, I don't feel like I'm playing a weak champion, because it's a mix of using Halo Blades and a mix of the build that I use that I'm also going to go over in a sec. It just doesn't feel like a weak champion. I don't feel like this really belongs in C tier, but I'm going to put her hesitantly here just because that is where the majority of the player base feels she belongs, and it's where win rates think she belongs. However, I'm just going to go over these other things, which I will explain, I think make her quite a bit stronger than the meta builds do. You might actually want to consider playing Xayah with them. So, okay, so I've already been over Halo Blades, and, you know, well, let me just point out already. So as we saw, Halo Blades has a 2% higher win rate than pretty much anything else. Despite having, like, so it has almost a non-existent pick rate, just 3%, so it's basically not affecting these win rates at all. So basically, pretty much every win rate you see here, if you're assuming that Halo Blades is 2% better than Lethal Tempo, then pretty much every win rate you see here, you gotta amplify by like 2% just to like if you're a believer like me that Halo Blades is superior, then you gotta adjust every win rate that you see here, because none of these win rates are based off of her strength of Aphelios blades. They're only based off of lethal tempo. So that being said, there's a few build choices here. I think the best build choice is Essence Reaver into Guild Force. However, this build is not even necessarily that much better than just, you know, just Kraken Slayer into Essence Reaver, Kraken Slayer into Phantom Dancer. It's not that big a deal. Like, even though this is what I think is the best choice on her, it's not by a huge margin. So this on its own does not save Xayah's win rate. However, one thing that I do think is being very much slept on Xayah is Navori Quick Blades. So Navori Quick Blades on certain champions amplifies their DPS by similar amounts as Infinity Edge, because even though the auto attack damage is obviously going to be a lot lower because you get slightly less AD and the loss of amplifying on crit, you do get lower cooldowns. So if your champion does a lot of damage through abilities, then that can kind of match the output that you would be dealing with Infinity Edge. And I think Xayah is one of these cases, but another thing is Xayah has pretty much low cooldown CC on her E if her E is low cooldown. Her E naturally does not get low cooldowns, however it becomes extremely low if you have Navori Quick Blades and a bit of crit. And I think the breakpoint at which Navori Quick Blades actually becomes worth it is around 3 items. So we just go on 3 items here and we just sort Navori by third. You can see pretty much all the top builds are already 59% win rate, 60% win rate, 58%. And that is quite a big upgrade from the rest of the builds, which are 56%, 55%, 30%. We sort by Infinity Edge only as third. All the top Infinity Edge builds are still like 4%, 3% lower. And so therefore, if we take a look at only, take a look at only Navori third. So basically with Navori third, we already see a huge increase to our win rate, right? Then if we add that increase to the increase that you would expect to see from the Halo Blades, which I also think is being very much underrated, there's basically 2 huge factors here. Xayah is way stronger with Navori than with the builds that people are actually using on her, and Xayah is much stronger with Hail of Blades than the runes that people are actually using on her. These are 2 different things that are making her much stronger than she otherwise looks. Where does that leave her on the tier list? If I am right about this, I don't know. B tier, high B tier at the very least I want to say, maybe A tier. Definitely, I very much thought she would be S tier. Just somewhere up here. This is only if I'm right about this. I don't want to say that I am. It's not a fact. This is just my opinion. And purely because I don't want you to take my opinions at face value, that is why I'm still leaving her at C tier. But, you know, if you do trust me, if you do, like, agree with my logic, just bear in mind, Xayah could belong somewhere up here. Just as long as you're using Navori third. And preferably the build order preferably should be Essence Reaver into Guild Force, or if you need, you know, anti-tank, then Kraken Slayer into Guild Force. Kraken Slayer into Essence Reaver. It's not too important. The most important thing is Navori third, then Infinity Edge. Okay, so after that, moving on, we're reaching D tier. These are the lowest of the lows. Start with Varus. So Varus, as we know, was quite popular with lethality builds somewhat recently. Those builds got nerfed. Then I think he was quite. I was playing him quite recently with crit build, Immortal Shield Bow into Runeance, and that felt pretty decent to me. I stopped playing him though because I got bored, and then he also got a nerf, which was aimed at lethality builds that, even though they were pretty bad in solo queue already, were like dominating pro play. So that was a pretty big and direct nerf to my crit Varus as well, even though he wasn't really that focused on Q. It was still a big hit, and I want to say the build that I was using, which is pretty much this, also shows up quite good in win rates. You could use either, it was Shield Bow into either Runeance or Ginsu's, either one worked. It is still like decent, or no, well, okay, decent is too generous. It's playable. It's not bad, right? But it is like the best of the best builds. Like, it is way higher than his other win rate builds, basically. And that is still like At best, okay. I don't think it really saves Varus from being D tier, basically. There is so many other choices. If you want to do DPS, Vayne is better, Kog'Maw is better. Basically, there are so many other ADCs that do the same thing but better. Like, at best, he's like just a way worse version of Ashe at the moment. Like, if you want DPS, like onto tanks, go for Vayne or Kog'Maw. If you want utility, go for Ashe. Varus is like this mix of the two where he kind of burns tanks pretty well. And he also has this utility, but he's just so bad. Like, he does the utility aspect so much worse than Ashe, and he does the DPS so much worse than Kog'Maw and Vayne. The most popular builds as well are Poke. If you want to go Poke, well, why would you ever pick him over Sivir? Who also has a really good utility ult. It's not CC quite, but like the ult is just also really strong. For if you want the team play based ultimate. In fact, I would probably say it's better than Varus ult, honestly. Varus usually should be saved by his DPS, or his poke being better, but right now, like, some of his parse is just not that great, unfortunately. So actually, he is another example actually that does get sort of salvaged. I forgot how well he uses Wit's End. However, nobody actually uses Wit's End on him, so I can't really say just how strong it should be, because none of the win rates are actually really reliable, and there's not enough sample size. I don't know necessarily what you would want to follow it up with. I mean, I guess Wit's End would be fine. Ginsu's would be fine. Runaan's would be fine. Phantom Nessa would be fine. But I don't know exactly where that stacks up relative to other ADCs. So it should be viable as a first item. However, there's just not enough data for me to really judge that. I do know that he should probably be better with Wit's End than like D tier, but I just don't really know where to place him. So D tier it is. And you know, again, it's like the one redeeming build. And as far as Wit's End abusers go, I mean, he's still like not the greatest. If we're assuming that all Wit's End abusers here are like should be inflated by their synergy with Wit's End, like the champion like Vayne, which I've sorted like only partially by her synergy with Wit's End, he belongs higher because of Wit's End. We're assuming that pretty much like every Wit's End abuser here is being inflated. Then even Varus, even accounting for the inflation, he's still at the bottom because the other Wit's End abusers are just better than him, right? So he might be a little bit better than Lucian at least, but you know, he's still pretty terrible. Last but not least, last and very much least. Sorry, Lucian, you are terrible. This champion is terrible. There's no salvaging this. There's no build. I've looked into so many things for Lucian as to like try and see if there's something that people are sleeping on, if there's something that might be quite underrated, something worth looking into. All his win rates with all runes are terrible. All his win rates with all mythics are terrible. No matter what order you throw in there, whether you want to use the classic Essence Reaver into Gilfrost build, it's still really fucking bad. I mean, it's the same win rate that Xayah actually has with this build, but unlike Xayah, which is saved by Navori being super underrated on her as a third item, Navori is just... It's decent on Lucian. It is actually quite underrated, I want to say. It is about as strong as Infinity Edge. The only problem is Infinity Edge also, like, his win rate with Infinity Edge is not great because he sucks. So his win rate with Navori is not great because he sucks. There's no saving this champion. This champion is basically held back by being so good on mid lane. Not even in solo queue. The thing is, in solo queue, his win rate on mid lane is not that great. In fact, I think it's even lower than in bot lane. Yep. But he is really good as a mid laner in pro play, and that means he has to be balanced around being so strong on mid lane and pro play. And it's a very tough situation for Riot to be in, because he's such a popular ADC. He has such a great design. People love him. It would be so sick if he could be viable as an ADC in solo queue, but whenever he's so much as viable, he's so busted on mid lane and pro play. And if he's strong on bot lane, he's beyond busted in pro play. It's a sad situation. They need to try and somehow get him out of the mid lane. Because it's basically running the champion. Trust me, I've looked into so many things here. I've like considered maybe no mythic, maybe Essence Reaver into Navori, maybe Bork could be quite underrated. Oh, what about Manamoon? Maybe Manamoon could have some decent win rates on him. No, there's nothing. There's nothing that is being slapped on here. He is just fucking terrible. In fact, he probably doesn't even deserve to share a tier with Varus. He probably really belongs in E tier. F tier? I don't know what you would call it. He's really bad. Which is sad. I used to love Lucian, you know? I do still love Lucian. He's so fun. But it's like, why would you ever play him? Like, I look at this and it just breaks my heart. Doesn't matter which item point you reach. These win rates are still like terrible for how many items you're managing to build. It is what it is. Anyway, yep, that's the end of the tier list. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. You've learned a lot from this. Hopefully this helps you climb in your games. I will add a disclaimer. At the end of the day, you are not going to climb any faster picking up a champion that you don't actually play well compared to playing a champion that you do play well. So for me, for example, I am a Twitch main. I mean, recently I play pretty much everything, right? But the reason I was a Twitch one trick for so long is because Twitch was my best champion. For me, Twitch is S tier, always. No matter what build is a meta, or even if there's no sleeper builds, he's still for me always S tier. I am never going to climb more efficiently than if I'm just spamming Twitch. And for Tristana is also like my second best champion. For me, if I'm tryharding, I'm not spamming Draven and Aphelios. For me, I'm tryharding by spamming Twitch and Tristana. For you, maybe you also have this champion that is like your best champion. And it doesn't matter what's at the top of the tier list, you're still always going to climb better with that champion. Maybe you're just the sort of person that just doesn't really care what he plays, just does about the same with everything, and what matters for you is what's strong. Then you want to be playing these. But, you know, it is important that you don't like take this at face value, as this is what you should be playing. Each player is different. You should at the very least experiment, see what works for you. And if you know for a fact that you're really good at one champion, probably you're just going to be better off playing that champion. Anyway, yep, hope you found this helpful, and make sure to drop a comment. Let me know what you thought about this video. If you want to see more, feel free to subscribe, drop a like, and I'll see you guys in the next video.